than anybody else. And he was talking about the ventilators, but he should have ordered the ventilators. And he had a choice. He had a chance, because right here, I just got this out, that he refused to order 15,000 ventilators. I'll show this to Bill, but take a look at that, Bill. What does that say?
Is this social distancing here?
This says New York Governor Cuomo rejected buying recommended 16,000 ventilators in 2015 for a pandemic. Established death panels and lotteries instead. So he had a chance to buy in 2015 16,000 ventilators at a very low price, and he turned it down. I'm not blaming him or anything else, but he shouldn't be talking about us. He's supposed to be buying his own ventilators. We're going to help. But, you know, if you think about Governor Cuomo, we're building him 4 hospitals. We're building him 4 medical centers. We're working very, very hard for the people of New York. We're working along with him. And then I watch him on the show complaining. And he had 16,000 ventilators that he could have had at a great price, and he didn't buy them.
Yeah, and I hear you going back and forth, and Governor Cuomo has talked in recent days that you regularly talk and have a good relationship. And so we will follow the news as you're bringing it to us right there in the Rose Garden. I want to get to a viewer, because the people's voice is so huge right now and always, Mr. President. Joyce submitted a question from Facebook about the stimulus checks. Let's watch, and I want to get your reaction.
I am fortunate. I can continue to work. I can telecommute. There are people who are losing jobs. They're losing an entire income for a household. And rather than receive a check, I would just like to pay it forward and have the government pass mine on to someone else.
Wow, is that great? Well, you obviously come from West Virginia. I love that state. And thank you very much, Joyce. I'll tell you what, that's great. I wish we had more people like Joyce, I'll tell you. But, you know, it's going to be a substantial amount of money, around $3,000 for a family of 4. And assuming it all gets done, assuming we can get the Democrats to sign it. But it'll be great. But, Joyce, I think that's such a nice gesture. Really, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, and you just said, right when you and I began talking a few minutes ago, that, you know, almost in breaking news fashion, it looks like the juggernaut might be moving on Capitol Hill to try to push toward that stimulus bill. So we'll be watching for that. You know, Mr. President, I'm watching the Dow, as you have been talking, and formerly the Vice President. It's up by more than 1,500 points. What do you watch for each day? I mean, are you keeping your eye on that? Is it companies calling you, small and large? Like, what is your barometer that, okay, things are in trouble or things are doing better?
Well, I think the Dow was helped by the fact that there were theories that we were going to stay out for 4 or 5 months, and you can't do that. You destroy our country if you did a thing like that. And we're going to be opening relatively soon. Our time comes up on Monday or Tuesday, the allotted 2 weeks, but we'll stay a little bit longer than that. But we want to get open very soon. I think that was a big reason it's gone up. I also think that the fact that the Senate and the House, we seem to be getting along as much as you can get along. We seem to be getting along now on a bill. I think that maybe had even less of an impact than the fact that we're opening up this incredible country, because we have to do that. I'd love to have it open by Easter. Okay, I would love to have it open by Easter. I will tell you that right now. I would love to have that. It's such an important day for other reasons, but I'll make it an important day for this too. I would love to have the country opened up and just raring to go by Easter.
That's April 12th. So we will watch and see what happens. I'm going to toss it back to my cohort, Bill.
Thank you, Harris. That would be a great American resurrection 2.5+ weeks from now.
That's very good.
Dr. Birx, a series of questions on the medical front here. I want to go to Allison from Indiana, appropriately so, Mr. Vice President, who has a question by way of Facebook about possible mutation. Watch.
My question is this: if you were to get the coronavirus, can it mutate, and can you get it again?
Dr. Birx?
So that's a great question, and a very smart question, because it's an RNA virus. It can mutate, and it constantly mutates. But what has been pretty good about the coronaviruses in general is they keep their structural pieces very similar. What do I mean by that? There's the outer coat, the envelope, and the inside part of the virus has stayed very constant. It's even very similar to SARS, which we haven't seen since 2003. And so what has been picked for sites, both for the vaccine and for monoclonal antibodies, are very much those constant sites. And we believe that anybody who becomes positive and makes effective antibody, because there are some people who can't make as good of antibody as others, but if you make effective antibody, you shouldn't get reinfected.
The way it was described to me, and correct the medical positioning of this question, but the virus is trying to figure out a way to survive. And that's where it moves around and it mutates. Now, in Singapore, there was a headline earlier today suggesting a possible second wave in that island nation. How do you gauge that?
Well, remember in Singapore, they took the president's guidelines and they executed them very early because they could see China next door. And so they saw those and they implemented those guidelines. So very few people became infected in Singapore. Because so few people have been infected, you don't have what they call herd immunity. And so until we get through this current pandemic, if it has seasonality, which we hope and believe it could, if it gets through this current season, it will be in everybody's best interest to do, as the president has recommended, our work on vaccines, our work on additional therapeutics, and really getting to both pre and post prophylaxis so that the healthcare providers can get a shot potentially that will protect them. We would call it pre-exposure prophylaxis. All of those things are being worked on to prepare us for the next season. We're focused today on what we need today and to get through this current epidemic. And then we're also getting prepared in case it comes back in the fall, or in case it comes back in the fall of 2021 when we'd have a vaccine.
I'm going to bring in the Surgeon General on this, and to both of you, I've been listening to you very carefully for weeks now, and what you've said is we want to be the model of South Korea. Well, South Korea has flattened the curve, to borrow a phrase, and their death rate is about 1.2%. This morning here in the U.S., our death rate was right around that same mark, 1.3%. To the Surgeon General, what does that tell you, or how much do you consider the death rate here at home when we try and make decisions for ourselves?
Well, thank you for that, Bill. I think there are a couple of important things for the American people to remember. The first one is that when you look at the data here in the United States, of all the people who we've tested so far, only about 90% of those, well, 90% of those folks do not have the coronavirus. They test negative. So most people, even when they have cold and flu symptoms, do not have coronavirus, number one. Number two, 98, 99% of people are recovering. So people need to understand that, yes, some people will get coronavirus in many communities across America, but that most of them will recover. That's very important for people to understand. And beyond that, we're trying to help people understand the importance of stopping the spread. And the president, when he 9 days ago listened to his health providers, his health consultants, he said, what do we need to do right now? And we said we need to lean into this next 2 weeks to stop the spread, and then we need to reassess. And one thing I can tell you for certain is that I've been on the task force for 3 weeks, and the president listens to Tony Fauci. He listens to Dr. Birx. He listens when I, or Dr. Carson, or Dr. Hahn, or Dr. Redfield speak up. And he also listens to the governors. And so we will assess at the end of the 14 days, and we'll figure out the most appropriate thing to do. And based on my experience in the task force so far, the president will make an appropriate decision based on all the data.
Thank you for that answer. Is everything cool with you and Dr. Fauci? He was not
absolutely.
there. He wasn't there last night for the briefing. He's not here today.
Because he has other things to do. No, we get along very well.
Your relationship's good?
I think it's been very good. You would have heard about it if it wasn't. I mean, every time he's not at a meeting, and sometimes other people too. They said, why isn't Dr. Birx at a meeting? Is there a problem? And I said, Deborah, could you please come to the meeting? Do you mind? Because, no, I respect all of these people. These are great people. And Deborah is extraordinary. And Tony's extraordinary. I get along with all of them. But if there's, they have other things to do. And yesterday we weren't really talking about what he's an expert on. We were talking about other things, a lot of other things. And, I don't think they should be at every news conference.
You're good. That's the point.
Yeah, we're fine. We're fine.
Dr. Birx, early on you said the massive amount of testing in South Korea, 96%, to the Surgeon General's point, 96% came back negative. I think that's an important point to convey again to the American people. Noah from Maryland has a question now. His question is about healthcare workers on the front lines of this pandemic.
Now, my mother is a nurse. She works in the healthcare field. What do you and your team plan to do to help healthcare workers that are putting themselves at risk every single day as a result of the coronavirus?
Excellent question. Dr. Birx, you want to take that?
Yeah, I love that question because my mother's a nurse. She's 91 now, so she's not practicing. But I think we have to remember in majority of hospitals and in majority of places, it is the nurse that are the front lines. They're the ones working every moment with the patients to ensure that they do well. They're the ones at the bedside. They're the ones providing comfort. They're the ones providing the medical interventions. And they are our first priority. It is why we've worked so hard to get the protective, personal protective equipment out there. But I think what we didn't often talk about is we're really, with the changing guidelines for testing, that is going to free up all of that personal and protective devices that were being utilized for testing back into the hospitals and the clinics for our nurses and doctors. And that's going to make millions of more masks and PPE, as we call it, available to the hospital workers who need it the most, because now people can self-test.
And Bill, can I jump in on that really quickly? I want people to know that I'm a still practicing anesthesiologist at Walter Reed. The vice president and I, we first met during Ebola. And I went into the hospital. I put on PPE. I know how scary it is even when you have the proper equipment to deal with an infectious disease. And I'm getting texts, phone calls, messages from people all across the country. And I want healthcare workers of America to know we are fighting for you each and every day to make sure you get what you need from the stockpile, to make sure you get what you need from manufacturers across America, to make sure you're getting decreased demand, which is why we put out our new guidelines on elective surgeries. Because it's not just about increasing the supply. We aren't going to supply our way out of this problem, as important as supply is. We need to also lower demand by decreasing unnecessary usage of PPE. And a game changer that just came out just this week was the new FDA self-swabs. And the vice president and the president have talked about that. That will utilize less PPE. So we're working on making sure supply gets where it needs to, and FEMA's doing a great job of that, but lowering demand.
How can someone watching this right now acquire a self-test?
Well, right now, the FDA is making that more available. We've seen testing increase in real numbers. When you look at last week from Monday to Friday, the amount of testing increased tenfold. So we're seeing testing increase. The concern is that it's actually using up more PPE, which is why we want to prioritize testing for the people who are most in need, the healthcare workers, the people who are vulnerable, and why we're pushing. The FDA has lowered barriers like none other to make sure we can get these new testing modalities available that use less PPE and do more tests.
Thank you for that. Back to Harris now with another question. Harris.
All right. Actually, you know what? I want to stay on this home testing kit topic for just a second with Dr. Birx. You know, the home test, is there a place where people check a box and say I'm positive or not? How are you going to keep up with people who test themselves? And you need that information, Dr. Birx, to know where the clusters are in the country. That's part of why you would do it.
Great. So it's not a home test, it's a self-test. So what do I mean by that? I mean, the individual can drive up, receive the items, because again, we still want to just test people with fever and symptoms that really need to be tested. They can self-swab the front of their nose, put it in the container, then the person can collect it with gloves alone with the biohazard bag and get it in. I just want to speak to the Americans for just a second, though. We have to ensure that we still are testing, even though probably by today, we will have done more tests than South Korea did in 8 weeks, in the last eight days. In the last 8 days, we've done more testing than South Korea. But we did that because we transformed the testing process, as the president spoke to. But we don't want people who are just worried to go get tested. If you don't have a persistent fever, if you don't have a cough, if you're not in the risk group, if you're not a nurse or doctor, we really want the testing and the drive-through testing and the testing that is provided in the cities to be very much still focused on the people who need it, because there's only so much even those high-throughput machines are doing. They're doing about 50, 60, 70,000 tests a day now. They could get potentially to 150,000 a day. But we want to make sure we're testing in the areas that really have the problems.
Yeah, Bill, it's
all
one
right,
of the things.
and knowing the
just to amplify
difference
that
between
point,
the
if I may.
home Go right ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Harris. You know, the American people are asking all the time. The president and I hear it all the time and see it. It's what can they do to make a difference? And in addition to the 15 days to slow the spread, the American people can take Dr. Birx's advice. It's that old proverb that it's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. And one of the ways that you can help is by recognizing we want to focus testing on people that have symptoms. Although according to the tests now, as the Surgeon General said, 90% of the people that have been tested for the coronavirus don't have it. Okay, that number, we've tested more than 320,000 people, and that's an encouraging number, I would expect. But for any American out there that just may be concerned but not be symptomatic, one of the ways you can make sure the testing's available for people that have symptoms, and just as importantly for our health care workers that we want to make sure have all the protective equipment that they need, you can recognize that if you don't have symptoms, don't do a test.
Harris, one thing I might add.
That, Bill.
Harris, one thing I might add that to me is so important. Again, we took something that was broken and we made it the model. And I didn't even know, I just heard the number for the first time from Deborah, that in a short period of time we've done more testing than South Korea. Now, you're not going to read that in the newspapers because they don't like to write things like that. But I'd love you to say that one more time, because that's a big number. We've done more than South Korea in a short period of time. We're doing more now than South Korea by a lot. What was that number?
So we're believing that there are probably around 290,000.
290,000, almost 300,000.
And now we're way over 300,000. But we achieved that over the last 7 to 8 days. We have to do more. We understand that.
They did that over 8 weeks.
Over about 8 weeks.
We're going up proportionally. We're going up very, very rapidly. Every day we're going up.
What was our negative test rate at the moment? Is it 90% or is it higher?
So I really am glad you asked, because this gets into where is the virus now and where is it expanding. And so across the country, our test rates are still way under 10%, except for one place, New York City, Metro New York, New Jersey, close to New York City. Those rates are coming in the 28% range. Right now, New York, the case attack rate, what we're talking about, the number of people who are getting infected, is 4 to 5 times any other place in the country.
Why is that? Density of population?
I think part of it is density. Part of it is the spread that may have happened on metal surfaces, like in the subway and people that were in the subway. Part of it may be a large number of people came back after Christmas from Asia that didn't get caught up in the closure.
Do you blame the governor for that?
And part of it could be the Europeans who have come back subsequently. And obviously it's a big area of world trade and global transit. So I think the virus probably was quietly expanding, because until it gets into an older population, you don't really see it in the same way.
Thank you for that. And we'll get to all of you again in a moment here. Going to get a quick break here. More of your questions from across America here at the White House in the Rose Garden after this.